My name is Viola Ratcliffe. I am the program manager for Bib Tucker Sew-Op, and I live in Bessemer, Alabama. Last year was LaShawnda Crowe Storm, so the quilt we created last year was in response to LaShawnda Crowe Storm's workshop with Bib Tucker Sew-Op. And LaShawnda Crowe Storm is an artist. She's based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and she has created the Lynch Quilts Project, which is a quilting project that explores the United States history of racial violence. And so I learned about LaShawnda's work when I was a graduate student at Bowling Green State University, because I wrote my thesis on her. And so that's kind of how I found out about LaShawnda and her work. But what really drew me to her work was the fact that she was using quilts as a way of memorial. And so I thought it was really interesting that the medium of quilting was being used as a way not to just show us this history and to teach us about this history, but to also honor the victims of this history who were often not recognized in that way. There are so many victims of lynching who we don't even know their names. We don't know where their bodies are buried. The photograph that is part of LaShawnda Crowe Storm's, her name was Laura Nelson. That came out of a book, Without Sanctuary, which is a collection of photographs of lynching postcards and lynching photographs that were taken during the 1800s, early 1900s. And that book really, I had seen that book myself when I was an undergraduate student, and that was the first time I ever realized this was something that existed. I knew about lynching, but I did not realize there were literally photographs that had been circulated and postcards that had been circulated, and people had collected these items. I mean, they were in antique stores and people's attics and scrapbooks. And to me, that was really jarring. But the way that LaShawnda was able to use this image and take it, and it is a very jarring image of Laura Nelson being lynched from a bridge in Okemah, Oklahoma, but it's blown up to a scale that is larger than life. So she appears in the quilt like 8 feet tall, maybe, or maybe even larger than that. And you're able to see details of this image that you would have missed in the photograph. Like, you're able to see her wedding ring, and you're able to see the details of her dress, and you're able to really get a sense of who this person was outside of just this victim of this horrendous crime. And so looking at that, and then looking at the way that lynching has been this horrible crime that has taken place in our country that up until recently was rarely talked about, not recognized at all on a local level or even a national level. And it's really, I feel, been within the past 10 years maybe that the conversation has shifted, and now we're really starting to talk about these things a lot because of the work that LaShawnda's done, I'm sure. Also Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, and the memorial in Montgomery has allowed a lot of people to actually come to terms with this history, to learn about this history, to research it for themselves, because a lot of people in our own communities have this history within their own families. And so it's something that you don't always know is a part of you until you start doing that research, because this isn't something that your grandmother or your mom or your great-grandmother is going to sit down and really talk to you about. So it's really been a really eye-opening experience. But when she came to Birmingham, and we invited her to come because we wanted her to do this workshop with us, we opened it up to people who wanted to register, members and non-members, I believe, of Bib Tucker Sew-Op. And so it was a group of individuals, pretty smaller group, like maybe 20 people max was who could attend. And so it gave you an opportunity to really talk to people, to really connect with people in a way that doesn't always happen with the March Quilts, because in the past, these sessions were just open. So anybody could come, anybody could do whatever, participate in whatever way they wanted, whether that was they sat down and created an entire block, or they just did 4 stitches on a block and they're like, okay, I can't do it anymore. That was enough. Like, we would always include that. So this time we actually had a chance to really talk about things and discuss things and really go to deeper levels and layers of conversation that we normally do around a quilting theme. And I knew I wanted to create a block for the quilt that we were going to do in response to her visit. I just wasn't sure what the response was going to be. The other interesting thing about last year is that when LaShawnda came, it was February 2020, pre-COVID, as far as like global pandemic COVID, and pre the Black Lives Matter resurgence. And I don't even want to say resurgence really, because it never really went away, but pre like the global like awakening, I guess, of social racial injustice in the United States, but then also across the world. And so when she came, all of our minds were like in a completely different space because none of that had happened yet. And so her visit almost like in a way prepared us in a way that we weren't aware of, I guess, for what was to come. Interesting way, because then as soon as she left, like a month later, we're in a global pandemic, everything shut down. You know, we were working from home, we weren't meeting together. All of our plans for the year 6 March Quilt were like put on hold. Like all these sessions that we were supposed to have, we weren't doing that anymore because you can't gather. Everybody's still trying to figure out technology. So Zoom was still so new that nobody was really thinking, oh, let's just Zoom call each other. Like that wasn't a thing in March. So we were still figuring this thing out. And a lot of us were creating our blocks on our own individually at home and processing everything that was happening, processing COVID, processing the global pandemic, processing the social distancing, the isolation, the uncertainty, the anxiety of the future, because we had no idea what the world was going to look like in a week, let alone like in a month. So it was really kind of a stressful time. And then summer hits, you know, May, and all of a sudden there are these murders of Black men and women by law enforcement and then also by people within their community that were not being recognized until the people were like, y'all are going to recognize this and this would not get swept under the rug. So for me, it started with Ahmaud Arbery. And then, of course, there was George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But all of those things brought back, like, to life LaShawnda's work in a different way, because it was something where we all were familiar with the fact that this never ended for us in our country. Like a lot of times there's a conversation that likes to be had where that was then, this is now, we've moved past that. We don't want to focus on the past. We want to just dwell on the future and try to move past these things. And last summer was like, no, you're not past it at all, because this is still happening. And the reason why this is even allowed to continue to happen is because it was never taken, like we never addressed it. We never had the conversation. The people who perpetrated these crimes in the past went scot-free. So there's this idea that when things are done against Black people, it carries a lesser weight of punishment than when it's done against other people. So it was a really interesting thing. So like all of these things are like in your mind, and I'm trying to figure out how to create a quilt block about LaShawnda's work that is a quilt block that will actually represent the way I feel, but not be so busy with stuff, because there's a lot of feelings that it just gets lost in what I'm trying to say. And what I finally settled on was the Sankofa bird, which Sankofa isn't a Dinka symbol. The meaning behind it, basically the bird has its head twisted behind itself, looking backwards, dropping like a seed onto its back is how it appears to be. And the idea is you have to look to the past to learn from it in order to create a better future for yourself. And I feel that very strongly, but then I really felt that in response to last year, because I felt as though everything we were going through last year, we had already experienced, and we had to look to the past to find the solutions to carry us to the future, to create a future for ourselves, where this isn't something that we revisit every year, every 6 months, every 2 years. We have to figure out how to just end this completely. And it's the conversation that needs to be had. It's not enough to just I don't want to say it's not enough to just pass laws, because legislation is important. Prosecuting the people who perpetrate these crimes is very important. But overall, there needs to be a conversation, because the mindset has to change. Because if the mindset doesn't change, the only thing that's going to happen is that another generation is going to come up with the same mindset and think that this can happen again, and it can't. So that to me was really important. It was trying to look towards the past, look to the people in the past who have done this work, who has led these movements, whether it's Ida B. Wells Barnett and other civil rights activists and people like LaShawnda and the artists and the creatives, the songwriters, the ones who always were telling us that this is happening. And let's really hear what they have to say. Let's look at how they did things. And then let's look in 2020 and be like, okay, so we have a framework. We want to do things a little bit differently. We have different resources available to us. So how can we do this? So that's kind of where that came from.